Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for August 19th to 25th. This week I read 6 books, I watched 1 movie, I watched 1 show, I listened to 1 podcast, and I listened to 2 books. So this is going to be a long one. Grab a snack because I have some things to tell you. First this week I finished Blue Bloods by Melissa De La Cruz. This is the first book I picked up for the BookSwapAthon, in which I called my best friend and asked her what book I should read for that challenge. That was actually really fun and she was a really good sport about me putting her on the spot, so I will link that TBR in places for you. This book is about a group of students in New York who all come from families who arrived on the Mayflower and the secret they share. Based on the cover of the book and the fact that this series debuted over a decade ago, you probably already know they're vampires. This was a quick read and I want to read the rest of the series. It had intrigue, plot twists, and a subterranean library, so really it had everything I needed. The next book I finished this week was Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I mentioned in my last weekly entertainment wrap-up that I was 40 pages from the end of this when the week ticked over, because it was a chunker. It isn't quite 500 pages, but those pages are large with small font and margins. I picked this one up because we'll be discussing it at BookNet Fest in less than 2 weeks. This book is about a group of characters in a kingdom basically trying to get by. We start in Miriam's perspective. She is the daughter of a moneylender who is not very good at getting people to pay their debts. When her mother gets sick, Miriam goes out and starts collecting. She gets so good at this that the dreaded Winter Realm King challenges her to turn his silver into gold. The next perspective is Wanda, the daughter of one of the men in debt to Miriam's father. She ends up working at Miriam's house as a maid to pay off her cruel father's debts. He is constantly drunk and beating his children. Wanda sees her job as a way to escape. Third perspective, and the last one that I will mention, is Irina, the daughter of a duke. The duke purchases some enchanted silver that might catch the eye of the Tsar, who needs a bride, and has Irina in mind. These stories interweave with characters meeting and formulating plans, and other characters also have sections from their perspectives. The story overall was magical and made me want to know what was going to happen next. I do, however, have a very big complaint with how this book changed perspectives. Instead of indicating whose perspective we were in by having chapter or section breaks indicating the character's name, or making it obvious within the first sentence, this book switched at random. Sometimes it would take a few pages to realize we were in a completely new perspective. And these mental backflips detracted from my enjoyment of the book. We would also sometimes go back to see the same scene from a different character's perspective, but add way too much backstory. The next book I read was I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. I was a huge fan of Radio Silence, so when I found out she was publishing another book, I ordered it without even looking at a synopsis. This is a dual narrative between Angel, a Muslim high school graduate who is a huge fan of a band called The Ark, and Jimmy, a transgendered man with an anxiety disorder who is one of the members of The Ark. Angel goes to visit a friend that she's been talking to for 2 years on the internet in person for the first time so they can go to one of the Ark's concerts. And Jimmy is looking forward to some downtime, although it doesn't look like that is going to happen if they sign their most recent contract as it is. This book took a deep look at what it's like to be on both sides of the fandom in a deeply humanizing way. Often female fans of musicians are lumped together in an unhinged frenzy of hormones, and although there are some people that fit that description, that's not what fandom is for everyone. On the flip side of that, safety can be a huge concern for those who have become famous, to the point where they can't even go outside their flat for fear of being harassed or attacked. At the least, they can appear ungrateful for the support that people thrust at them, and at most, they can be hurt or killed. This book has both characters learning about themselves and how to speak up for what they want, and figuring out who they want to be. I also recently ordered Solitaire, which is Oseman's debut novel, and I'm very excited to get to that one. Again, I didn't even look up a synopsis. Moving on to books I read for another readathon this week, I reread Franklin's Flying Bookshop by Jen Campbell. This completes the Fantasy Fest challenge of reading a book with a non-human main character. This book is about Franklin, a dragon who likes books and befriends a girl named Luna, and they make a flying bookshop together. This is a children's picture book and the sequel comes out later this year, for which I am excited because I love bookish books, and although the sequel won't be focusing on the flying bookshop, I'm sure I will still get bookish feels. Next I picked up and promptly DNF'd Billy Budd by Herman Melville. This book is only 88 pages long and it's about a sailor, but I just couldn't get through it. And I made a video about why I don't care for classics, so I will link that for you. To replace the challenge of reading a book from a different genre for the BookSwapAthon, and complete the short story challenge for Fantasy Fest, I picked up Iron Hands. This is a picture book based off a Grimm's fairy tale about a giant man living under a curse in a forest, and the prince who chooses to free him when the king's men capture Iron Hands. The prince then has to run away with Iron Hands, learn some life lessons, and then still ends up with the princess because reasons. The final book I read for BookSwapAthon was the Bodyswap, which means that a lovely human sent me a book to read. I received it with about a day to go in the readathon, and that was Peter Darling by Austen Chant. This is a Peter Pan retelling in which our protagonist was born Wendy Darling, but runs away to become Peter Pan because his family won't accept that he's a boy. James Hook has had the run of Neverland for about a decade in Peter's absence, so he's had lots of time to find treasure and build up his fabulous wardrobe, but things get much more interesting when Peter Pan returns. I was so happy when I opened this package because this is not a book that I can find in my library or my local bookshops, and I've wanted to pick it up since Adriana over at Perpetual Pages talked about it. If you are looking for a queer coming of age and coming to terms with your attractions story, pick this one up. I had a craving for popcorn and needed to get myself out of the house, so I took myself to see Slender Man, which was just not very good. I grew up loving horror movies, but this was a disappointment. In terms of plot, there wasn't much to really care about, but I did appreciate that one of the extended scare sequences took place in an old public library. That's about all I was invested in when it came to this movie. I wasn't particularly well versed in the Slender Man myth, but I knew it was a thing that people cared about on the internet, which is an okay starting point for a movie, but it needed much more plot development to make it worth the astronomical price of theater admission. This week on Survivor, we finished season 8, which is the All-Star season. Since I'm aware of the car curse, a Survivor hex that was even mentioned in the season, I knew who of the final two was going to win overall. Since I also shipped the relationship that happened during this season, I was very happy with the surprise twist that happened during the finale, and to find out that those castaways are still together and have 4 adorable children. Although my favorite All-Star didn't win, he did get a fan favorite award of $1 million, which is something I don't think Survivor has done since then. But I will find out as we continue to watch the old seasons. This week I listened to Conversations with People Who Hate Me. It's been a while since I've listened to a podcast because I've been prioritizing audiobooks, but I finished one and my next one wasn't quite ready for download, so I had to fill in some time. In this podcast, Dylan Marin talks to people that have left him mean comments on the internet and opens up a dialogue about the person's motivation. If you haven't listened yet, I highly recommend it. This week I listened to Kat and Meg Conquer the World by Anna Primeza. This book is about Kat, a socially anxious girl whose family just moved provinces to be closer to her ailing grandfather, and Meg, a girl with ADHD who has separation issues after her stepfather leaves. These two end up being paired up for the school science fair, and although Kat takes the assignment very seriously, Meg is more interested in having a new best friend. Since these characters deal with different internal monologues in conjunction with their mental health issues, I feel this book was best consumed in an audiobook format. The narrators really put you in the mindset of the characters, but it was also exhausting at times. I don't mean that as a criticism. In fact, if a book makes me feel exhausted and it's not because of something I hated about the book, that is generally a compliment. There is, however, one thing I need to rant a little bit about because it was the focus of the first chapter and it annoyed the hell out of me. Kat starts out talking about how she has to be a freshman for a second time and how it's unfair. She goes on to explain that high school starts in the 9th grade in Ontario, but it starts in the 10th grade in Alberta. This means she is in the youngest grade of her school for the 2nd year in a row. But here's the thing. We don't use the term freshman in Canada. All that freshman, sophomore, junior, senior thing is an American thing that I only recently memorized so I could know the approximate ages of characters in American YA books. The author's website is vague about where she grew up, so it could have been the States, but now she lives in Alberta. In any case, fellow Canadians, if you can look past the American infiltration of language in this book, it is worth your time. The book is also own voices for Kat's perspective, as the author also has panic attacks and anxiety. The final book I consumed this week was The Rules of Magic by Alice Hoffman. I picked up a physical copy of this book for the BookSwapAthon at one of my local free little libraries, but I decided that this needed to be my audiobook for the week because audiobooks are a good strategy if you can use them during readathons. This is a prequel to Practical Magic, which I listened to last year. However, I found out at the end of the book that it was an abridged recording, so I don't know what I missed from the book. This book follows 3 Owen siblings as they find out that they are witches and their family has a curse. It spans decades and is refreshing because even though this is a book about witches, it didn't go out of its way to make it extra spooky. The relationships were the core of this book, and they stretched and reformed as the characters grew and accepted who they were. The only big problem I have with this book is the borderline pedophilia in the first chapter. I say borderline because there's a slightly different term for children of that age, but that is not something I am willing to Google. Vincent is 14 when a woman nearly 3 times his age takes him to bed, and nobody bats an eye about it. I don't particularly care that this part of the book was in the 1960s and statutory rape wasn't a law yet. This subplot added nothing substantial to the overall book and perpetuates the stereotype that boys just want sex no matter who the female partner is, and that women cannot be predatory, which is false. I can almost hear somebody typing in the comments that if the neighbor didn't teach him in the ways of sex, he might not have had sex with a different character that's more important later in the book. But just stop. Don't tell me that teens wanting to have sex with each other is a plotline that needs the help of a predatory teacher-lover pre-narrative, because it doesn't. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!